Welcome back. So in this section we're going to plot a basic scatter graph with our data. So just remind ourselves that we have two sets of data. We have calcium, which is the calcium uptake, and we have time, which is time that the item was in the solution for. So we're just going to plot a basic scatter graph of calcium. So we know our basic plotting tool is plt.plot, and the most basic graph that we can do is always remember to import plt as a first point. So if you try and plot a graph and you go, an error, what is plt? I don't know what that is. Remember to import Matplotlib. So import matplotlib.py plot as plt and load that in. And then we can print our basic scatter graph. And you might go, that's not a scatter graph, that's a line graph. It's literally joined with a line. And you're quite correct, because this is the most basic graph we can plot. So to turn it into a scatter graph, we just need to specify that there's no line, but there are markers. So a dot will give us a dot for each of those points and turn this into our scatter graph. And if you want to add a colour in there, let's turn it green. You can put your colour in there as well. So you can do your colour, your marker type, and your line type in there. So as soon as you specify marker type, the line disappears. We can bring it back to a solid line by putting a solid line in there, but the default is that if you don't specify it at that point, it doesn't have one, which is what we want for a scatter graph. And we're going to have a look in a minute at a different way of plotting a scatter graph as well. So that's just one set of data, that's calcium against just the number that it's in. So the first point is 0.3, the next one is minus 0.004. So it's just plotted against the number that it appears in the list. We can use this to plot two things against each other. So if we use the basic graph again, plt.plot, time and calcium, I'm going to deliberately plot it at this point to show you how ridiculous it is to use the line graph in this kind of data. That is no line graph anyone should see. And we're going to immediately get rid of that, and we're going to specify that I would like to have blue stars as my pointer, please. And it gets rid of that line, and you can see it's a much more sensible graph to draw. And you can see here again that we've got these three measurements at the same time. So we now have time on the x-axis. So let's pop that in, plt.x label, and that's time in minutes. Close that bracket, there we go. And plt.y label is calcium uptake in number of moles per milligram. Oh, missed a bracket. You can see we've updated our axes there. So that's doing a scatter graph using the basic plot, and you can see for the fact that we have to then specify the marker type that it's not a native scatter graph. And you can do a native scatter graph, that's absolutely fine. You will not be astounded to find out that it's plt.scatter. So let's try and recreate this graph, so just the calcium. And the bad news is that if you want to do a scatter graph using plt.scatter, then you have to have two bits of data. You can't just look at it with the number that it sits in the list. You have to have an X and a Y label. And to be honest, that for a lot of cases is sensible, because you're looking for things like clustering in the scatter graph. So you plotting it against the number that it happens to be in the list, not very useful. Sometimes useful, which is why you can do it with plot, but most of the time we want an X and a Y axis. So we're going to create the time versus calcium graph. And you can see this time I don't have to specify marker type, I don't have to specify colour, nothing at all. It just natively plots me a scatter graph. And well, they don't look identical at this moment in time because we've used different colours, but the point's in the same place. So let's make these identical. plt.plot, you don't need to specify that it's colour. plt.scatter, you do. It needs that keyword to tell you what it is. So you need to say colour, American spelling of colour is equal to blue, please. And immediately we've got the same colour of blue, we're nearly there. And then I also want to specify my marker because I used a star before. So that's a marker equals a star, please. And the titles are the same. So if you want to label the axes, that works in exactly the same way. So that's the same graph produced by two different methods. So that's up to you if you are wanting to use plt.plot or plt.scatter. For just producing a graph like this, they are identical. It doesn't make any difference. There are some differences which we'll come on to later on, and that's if you want to highlight a certain point, you can set individual colours on these points if you're using plt.scatter. And sometimes it's just a little bit neater to actually use a graph that doesn't automatically join up the lines when you use a scatter plot. But ultimately, that choice is up to you as to which you prefer to do. So for the rest of this, we're going to be using plt.scatter because this is specifically for scatter graphs, but obviously you can interchange plt.plot in there, apart from the bit where we're changing the colour of one of the dots. So when you're ready, have a think which you want to do. You can follow me with this plt.scatter. You can go rogue with plt.plot for the next level. That's fine. And I'll meet you in the next video.